It was 1:30 in the morning. I was standing at my neighbor's fence in the dark, looking down into a hole he had spent the entire day digging. At the bottom of it, half buried in the dirt, was the corner of a black garbage bag. His son had been missing for 5 years. I never found out what was in that bag. But that night was not where this started. It was just the night I stopped being able to look away. 3 of my neighbors taught me the same lesson in 3 different houses at 3 different points in my life. The lesson was always the same. The people living closest to you are the ones you actually know the least. Let me take you back to the beginning. I am not the kind of person who assumes the worst about people. I never have been. I grew up in a neighborhood where you knew your neighbors by name, where you borrowed things from each other without thinking twice about it, where you watched each other's houses when someone went on vacation and picked up each other's mail when it piled up on the porch. That kind of neighborhood shapes the way you see people. It makes you default to trust. Charles lived next door to me and my wife for 11 years before any of this happened. In those 11 years, I watched him go from being the loudest, most generous man on our street to something I barely recognized. The change did not happen gradually. It happened the day his 14-year-old son disappeared. His name was Danny. I remember the afternoon Charles knocked on our door to tell us. His face was doing something I had never seen a face do before, like every muscle in it was pulling in a different direction at once. He told us Danny had not come home from school. He had already called the police. He just wanted us to know. We told him we would do anything we could to help. We meant it completely. The story was on the local news for weeks. Search parties were organized. Flyers went up on every telephone pole within 5 miles. My wife baked things and brought them over. I mowed their lawn without being asked. We did everything good neighbors do when something terrible happens to the people living next to them. Danny was never found. After the first year, the news coverage faded. After the second year, the search parties stopped. After the third year, most people on our street had quietly accepted what the police had gently suggested from the beginning, that the outcome was most likely not a good one. My wife and I never said that out loud to each other. We certainly never said it to Charles or his wife, Kathy. We still had them over for dinner occasionally. We still accepted their invitations to summer barbecues, but Charles was different now, quieter, in a way that felt watchful rather than peaceful. He would go still sometimes in the middle of a conversation and look at something just past your shoulder, like he was tracking movement in his peripheral vision. Kathy had withdrawn almost completely. She smiled when spoken to, but her eyes stayed somewhere else entirely. We told ourselves this was grief. We told ourselves we understood. 5 years after Danny disappeared, Charles came over while I was taking out the garbage. He asked to borrow a shovel. I did not hesitate. I went straight to my garage and got him my best one. He thanked me and told me he just needed to do some work in his backyard and would return it by the following day. I watched him walk back through the gate to his property and thought nothing of it. An hour later, I happened to be upstairs, near the window that looks directly into Charles's backyard. He was digging a hole, a large one from what I could see. He was working hard at it, struggling with the effort the way a man in his mid-50s struggles with physical labor he is not accustomed to. I thought I would do him a favor. I grabbed my second shovel and went around to his back gate. The moment I called his name, he looked up from the hole and his entire body changed. He dropped my shovel. He came toward me fast, with his hands out, like he was trying to stop traffic. No, it is okay, Tim. I have got it. Please just leave. I told him it was not a big deal, that I was happy to help. He told me he would not allow me to use a shovel in his backyard. Then he pointed at the gate, like I was an animal being directed out of a room. I left without saying another word, because I did not know what else to do. The whole interaction took less than a minute, but it sat wrong in my chest the entire way back to my house. I went upstairs and watched him from the window. He dug for another 30 minutes. When the hole appeared to be finished, he stopped and looked around, not casually, deliberately, slowly scanning the tops of the fences, the upper windows of the surrounding houses, checking whether anyone was watching. He found me at my window before I could move away. I walked away from the glass as casually as I could manage and stood against the wall of my bedroom with my heart hitting my ribs. I checked the backyard every hour after that. He was not digging anymore. The hole was just sitting there, open and dark, in the middle of his yard. I told myself he knew I had been watching and would wait until nightfall. I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard it. The sound of a shovel striking packed earth, rhythmic and deliberate, coming through the darkness outside. I could not see anything from my window. The yard was completely black, so I went outside. I moved as quietly as I could across my own yard and looked over the fence. Charles was down in the hole, working steadily, not rushing, the way a man works when he has accepted that what he is doing needs to be done, regardless of how long it takes. I watched until he went inside his house. Then I went over the fence. The moonlight was just enough. At the bottom of the hole, barely visible through the freshly turned dirt, was a corner of black plastic, a garbage bag, partially buried, partially exposed. I stood at the edge of that hole and looked at Charles's back door, then back at the hole, then at the door again. I did this several times while my brain tried to process what my body already understood. Then I heard the back door open and I ran. I made it back over the fence and into my own yard and pressed myself against the exterior wall of my house, breathing as quietly as I could. I heard him moving around on the other side of the fence, then nothing. Then the sound of him walking to the far side of his house and disappearing. I went inside. I got back into bed. I did not sleep. The next morning, the hole was completely filled in, patched over so carefully that if I had not watched him dig it, I would never have known it had been there. His SUV, which was always in the driveway, was parked on the street instead. I do not know what happened in the hours between when I went back inside and when the sun came up. I do not know where he went. I do not know what was in that bag. What I know is this: Danny disappeared 5 years ago and was never found. Charles borrowed a shovel he has never returned. He buried something large in his backyard in the middle of the night and moved it before sunrise, and he has been standing at his window watching mine ever since. I have not told my wife. I have not told anyone. I do not know what to do with what I think I know. And I am genuinely terrified of the man who lives next door to me. That was the first house, the one I shared with my wife as an adult, where I learned that grief and guilt can wear the same face, and you will never know which one you are looking at. The second house came earlier, long before Charles, long before any of that, back when I was a teenager, and the people next door were not grieving anything. They were something else entirely. I want to be clear about something before I tell you this. I have never spoken about what happened to anyone, not my parents, not my friends. Not a single person in my life knows the full truth of what those two boys did to me and my brother in the months before we moved. I have carried this for years, and the only reason I am telling it now is because I think enough time has passed that it cannot hurt us anymore. I grew up in a house where we never really knew our neighbors, not in any meaningful way. The family next door had 2 boys. I knew their names because you hear names through open windows and over backyard fences, whether you intend to or not. Eric and Todd. Beyond that, they were just the quiet kids next door who we had spoken to maybe twice in the entire time we had lived there. My brother was 5 years younger than me. We were close, the way brothers are when there is no one else around to play with. One afternoon, we were shooting hoops in the driveway when Todd came outside and walked over to us. It was the first time he had ever approached us directly. He asked if it was true that we were moving. I told him it was. By the end of the conversation, he had invited me and my brother to go shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the following day. I said yes because it was the weekend and I had nothing else going on. I did not think much about it. The next evening, Eric and Todd rang our doorbell. My brother and I slipped out quickly because our parents did not know we were going. Walking down the sidewalk with those two was immediately strange. They were wearing full camouflage. Todd was carrying a large duffel bag over one shoulder. They moved with this focused, serious energy that seemed completely out of proportion with going to shoot BB guns by a river. My brother and I kept catching each other's eyes and pressing our lips together to keep from laughing. We were not laughing for long. When we got to the woods, Todd dropped the bag and unzipped it. Eric snapped a branch off a tree and hurled it into the river with a force that seemed like it came from somewhere angry. My brother and I looked at each other with an expression that had shifted from amused to something more cautious. Todd reached into the bag and handed weapons to me and my brother. They were not BB guns. I stood there holding a real firearm for the first time in my life, while Eric loaded a gun from the bag and started firing at trees across the river without any preamble or explanation. Just pulled it out and started shooting. I grabbed the gun out of my brother's hands before he could do anything with it, and put both weapons back in the bag. I told them we were not comfortable with this and needed to leave. Eric stopped firing. The two of them looked at us with an expression I have thought about many times since. It was not surprise. It was not embarrassment. It was the expression of people who had expected this outcome and had already decided how they felt about it. One of them swore at us as we walked away. I told my brother at dinner that night that the neighbors were strange. I did not mention the guns. I did not want to explain how I had ended up in the woods holding one. That night I woke up to cold air on my face. My window was open, all the way. I had not left it open. I felt something hard press against the back of my head. A voice behind me said, "Shh." Everything in my body went completely still. I did not scream. I do not know why. Maybe shock processes differently at 15 than I would have expected. I understood what was happening with a horrible clarity that felt like cold water moving through my chest. It was Todd's voice. He spoke quietly and slowly, directly behind my head. He told me that if I ever told anyone about the guns, or about that afternoon in the woods, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I said okay. He pushed the back of my head with the barrel of the gun before climbing back out through my window. I lay completely still in the dark for a very long time after that. For the next several months, until we finally moved, I lived like a person waiting for something terrible to happen. Every night I would see one of them at their window, watching either my room or my brother's. Their behavior became stranger the closer we got to our moving date, like the countdown was making them erratic. One night, about a week before we finally left, a rock hit my window at around 1 in the morning. I made the mistake of opening it. Todd was standing below with a pistol aimed directly up at me. I dropped to the floor expecting the worst. I heard the two of them laughing. One of them called me a name I will not repeat. There were 2 more incidents that week. I will not describe them in detail. What I will say is that I have never been more grateful for anything in my life than I was for the day we loaded the last box into that moving truck and drove away from that house. My brother and I never told our parents. We never told anyone. We made a silent agreement without ever discussing it directly. Some things you survive by not looking back at them. I still think about those 2 boys sometimes, about what they might have grown into, about whether the violence in them was something they were born with or something that was put there. I hope I never find out. A buried bag, a gun against a 15-year-old's skull, 2 houses, 2 families, 2 sets of neighbors who turned out to be something other than what they appeared. By the time the 3rd house found me, I thought I understood what I was looking for. I thought I would see it coming. I did not. I want to start by saying that I do not scare easily. I grew up in a rough area. I went to a school where knowing how to handle yourself was not optional. I have been in situations that most people would find legitimately frightening, and I have handled them without falling apart. I am telling you this because what happened 2 weeks ago broke through every wall I had built around that part of myself and reduced me to someone I barely recognized. I am fresh out of college. I am living alone for the first time. The apartment I can afford is in an area that is not ideal. I accepted that trade-off before I signed the lease. You want independence at 22, you take the neighborhood that comes with the rent you can pay. The neighbors on my left play music at volumes that make my walls vibrate. Annoying, but manageable. The neighbors on my right are something else entirely. 2 women, one in her 60s, who is cold and unfriendly in a way that does not feel like shyness. It feels like hostility held just barely in check. and a younger woman who has some form of severe mental illness that I am not qualified to name, but have had no choice but to witness regularly since the day I moved in. I would be sitting on my front porch and look over to see the older woman physically holding the younger one back during what I can only describe as episodes, arms crossed over herself, rocking forward and backward with increasing speed, screaming sounds that did not form words. Sometimes she would look directly at me and point and say things to the older woman that I could not hear from where I was sitting. I started going inside when it happened. It was easier than sitting there. I told myself this was manageable, that I could live alongside strange without letting it become my problem. That was before the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I had work early the next morning and went to bed before 11, which was unusual for me. I had been asleep for maybe 2 hours when the noise from next door woke me up. The younger woman was in the middle of a severe episode. I could hear the older woman's voice underneath it, trying to manage the situation and failing. This went on for an hour. I got up, I put on shoes, I walked next door and knocked. The older woman answered the door and greeted me with, "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could if they could keep the noise down. She raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by the request. Just then, the younger woman entered the living room, screaming, "How dare you?" repeatedly. The older woman held her back from approaching me and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what had just happened, but I felt like I had not accomplished what I came there for. I walked back to my apartment in defeat. But they had finally gone silent next door. I was able to get some sleep at last. I woke up feeling like the night had gone way too fast. I looked at my clock. It was only 3 in the morning. My head fell back into the pillow in relief. But pretty soon, I thought I could hear something coming from downstairs. I got out of bed and went over to my door, just to make sure I was not hearing things. When I did not hear anything else, I went back to bed. I woke up again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes had passed since I had fallen back asleep. I did not know what could have woken me up, and then I heard it. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk to use as a light. But when I found it, I did not dare turn it on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of figure. I checked every corner. Even in the dark, I could tell there was no one standing there. This time, I heard exactly where it was coming from. I turned toward the edge of my bed. There was a black, shadowy, circle-shaped object right at the edge of the wooden frame. When the light from my phone finally landed on it, I saw that the shape was a face, the face of the woman from next door. She screamed like she was a vampire caught in the light. I screamed too. I scrambled for the door and tripped halfway there, and when I looked back, she was following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading back up to the bedrooms. I called the police while she pounded on the other side of that door, screaming things I could not understand. When the police arrived, I told them the woman lived next door and that something was seriously wrong with her. The older woman came over after hearing the commotion and spoke with the officers, pleading with them to let her go. They told her they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges. As he asked, the older woman gave me a look I can only describe as evil, hateful, in a way that did not change no matter what I said next. I told him I did not want to press charges. It did not matter. Her expression stayed exactly the same. The officers drove the woman away. The older woman watched them go, then turned and stared at me the entire walk back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get in her car and drive off into the dark. Those two still live next door to me. I am seriously considering moving out. The older woman has made it clear, in the only way she seems capable of making anything clear, that she despises me, and I have come to believe that the younger woman is not only deeply unwell, but genuinely dangerous. 3 houses, 3 sets of neighbors, a man who buried something in the dark and has been watching my window ever since. 2 boys who put a gun to a teenager's head and were never reported to anyone, not even decades later. A woman who somehow got inside a locked house in the middle of the night and was crouched at the edge of a stranger's bed, waiting. None of these stories ended the way a story is supposed to end. There was no arrest that explained everything. No confession, no body recovered, no diagnosis that made the screaming make sense. Charles still lives next door to a man who used to be his friend. The woman with the cold, flat stare is still parking her car on that same street tonight. That is the part nobody tells you about living next to something you cannot explain. It does not resolve. It just keeps living next door to you, year after year, while you tell yourself it is probably fine. You know your neighbors. You have seen them collect their mail. You have waved from your car. You think that means something. It does not mean anything at all. Lock your doors tonight. And if you ever hear something coming from somewhere it should not be coming from, do not wait to find out what it is. Because the most dangerous moment was never the night you finally heard it. It was every quiet night before that, when you told yourself everything next door was fine.